talk about in postgrad supervision, but in this presentation, I'm really looking into providing solutions to the gaps which I've identified to speak on during this presentation. So the table of contents through my talk would touch on gaps in good foundation, in laying a good foundation, managing the process, the supervision process, the progress, and also to managing self. So just as a word of introduction, I just thought it's very important for me to acknowledge that as much as I'm focused on gaps today, but there's so much exciting and fulfilling experiences in the research supervision journey with students that I would not want it to be camouflaged by the fact that today it's on about the problems or gaps and provision of solution. And you colleagues, the contributing factors to these is also the fact that postgrad supervision is quite a complex and a lengthy journey, which is also as a result of the fact that it brings together the minds, different minds, which this would be the supervisor and maybe two supervisors supervising a student, or more than two supervisors in some instances. And hence, then, if we don't pay attention to things that I'll be talking about today, for example, focused on strengthening relationships and putting efforts, and both sides of the parties putting efforts, then in working on the research journey, then there could be some lot of pulling and pushing that ends up not allowing the supervisor and the student to reach their goal. So I also want to just put my stance up front that I believe postgrad supervision, it's not only just about completion of the thesis, which most of the time, more especially with postgrad supervision, most of the time you find that students, they may focus just on completing the thesis, and find that when now you want to coach them towards other qualities or competencies, it becomes such a difficult because they think their end goal is just completing the thesis. Meanwhile, a thesis just form that particular component. Perhaps I could say in this diagram I'm showing you, if the thesis completion is just sits into the knowledge and intellectual abilities. And then, but there are also personal effectiveness domain and research governance domain, which then focuses on the management of the project itself, or the management of the finances of the project, and the engagement, which also focuses on the collaboration within the academic collaboration, which are the skills that the student can also learn, more especially during their PhDs, and maybe very less in the master's level. So colleagues, with regard to foundation, I start by identifying some gaps, and I want to say to you, at foundation phase is a very critical phase where you have a lot of choices to do. Whether you are a student or a supervisor, there are a lot of choices. This is a point where you can make or break the journey. So I'll talk about the student, choosing the student, choosing the supervisor, choosing a title, choosing a technique, and strengthening that proposal and the terms and conditions that you may need to set. I'm having a problem with okay. So in terms of choosing the supervisor, I would like to share some good qualities of a good supervisor. And here you want to look at the research interests of the supervisor. Is this person having the same interest as your interest as a student in terms of the research area you want to research on? But also it's important this person must be a subject and methodological expert. And this person must be interested in your career as a student. This is the supervisor who would ask you, what do you expect to see yourself in the next 3 to 5 years? Because then should the supervisor start being interested in your career as a whole, that person is showing that is interested to develop you as a researcher, not just to complete the thesis. And you also want to identify the supervisor with both the heart and the brain, the person who's passionate about supervision, because there is no point of having a superior professor who's knowledgeable and famous in the field, yet is not able to sit and listen to your problems should problems arise. So should you be needing to identify this kind of a supervisor, it's important for you to do some research. And if you are invited perhaps to an interview with this person, take your position to ask relevant questions. For example, ask questions that will get you to understand the work style compatibility. Is this person really working the way you can blend with? Ask about the quality of feedback, and ask about the availability. How is this person available to the students? And what is this person's expectations of the student? And it's also important, if then you are choosing a student as a supervisor, there are some strong qualities you need to pay attention to. For example, you need a student with strong motivation to study, and you need somebody who's self-driven and is a hard worker. But this person must also have a teachable character and reliable. Teachable character is because supervision entails a lot of correction and redoing. And if a person can easily give up and doesn't like to be corrected, then you will have a problem. And if the student is not reliable in terms of delivering work on time as agreed, then you will also have a problem. So if you are a supervisor looking for that good student, if the student is for a master's degree, you really want to start looking at the writing skills of this person. They may not be well polished up at that time, but you also want to look at a person with a teachable character and determination. And also, if this person is of a PhD candidate, it's very important for you to pay attention has this person published the master's report, or has he published as a first author? And because that is going to at least make you know that the person has dealt with critical reviewers' comments from the journals, and then that also bring up a good skill to manage the journey of the PhD. And also you want to make sure that this person has a strong motivation for PhD, because like a motivation, like you just want a doctor title to do a PhD, it's an inadequate motivation for a PhD. So it's also very important that the student has a strong motivation for doing a PhD. But also this person, you have to do a personality check, a background check, perhaps from the previous supervisor, and make sure that this person was not a problematic student from the previous journey. And it could be that perhaps there was a mismatch, but it's also very important that you do that background check. And then this student must be very passionate about the topic, because at the end, this person will be dealing with this topic day in, day out. When you're choosing a topic, what I've identified is that, there are a lot of factors that influence the chosen topic. Sometimes topics are in favor of the funder, the person who provided money to do the research, and sometimes the topics are in favor of the supervisor. But what I want to say here is that this is supposed to be a collaborative decision, and your voice as a student is very important here, and you have to exercise your assertiveness, because if you don't do that, you'll end up doing a topic that you really are not gelling up with. So for you to get to make this decision, you need to ask yourself, is this topic familiar with what you want, with your area that you are interested in? Is this topic of relevance to your future research interest? And you also need to get to check with yourself if are you really interested, if maybe the topic has been tweaked now to match the funder's needs or the supervisor's interest. You really have to ask yourself a critical question. Are you still interested in the topic? And be frank if you want it to be more revised. In terms of the gaps in proposal development, I just want to make sure that I pass this across. The research team that is dealing with supervising the student has to make sure that they are familiar with the techniques used. Should they, perhaps the main supervisor is not familiar with the techniques used, the research methodology techniques, it's very important that a co-supervisor who's specializing with those techniques is winged in the project, or else it's going to lead to a lot of problems and delays. Where there is a need to create novelty, more especially in the case of PhD students, it's very important that somebody kind of, the main supervisor or the supervising team, they assist then the PhD candidate to ensure that there is something novel about the topic that is being investigated. And it's very clear in that particular proposal. It is the role of the supervisor to make sure that the scope is within the limit that is required for that particular degree. Because at this stage, the student may not know what the scope fitting for a PhD entail and what the scope fitting for a master's degree entails. But most importantly, I would like to emphasize on the fact that when supervisors, should you be having a chance to choose who must review your student's protocol, choose a very independent person who is not going to be scared to critically review the protocol, because should you get somebody who's going to be lenient, perhaps just doesn't want to be too critical on the protocol may end up having lots of problems at implementation phase. And I usually say you've got to develop a protocol that even if anything happens to you as the main leader or the main supervisor, should there be a need to replace you in future, the person who was not there during protocol development should be able to execute what was approved at protocol development phase. So at the foundation phase, we still need to make sure that we establish the terms and conditions in order to bridge some gaps. So this is usually called a supervision agreement or memorandum of understanding in some areas in the world. So it's very important to set this. It actually sets a clear expectation of what needs to be done, and it also creates an environment conducive for learning during the PhD journey. And this is the role of the supervisor to make sure that the memorandum of understanding, it captures all the critical issues, even where these are standardized in the institution. Feasibility needs to be assessed. Is this memorandum of understanding feasible to the setup of these two people who are agreeing in this agreement? And the expectations needs to be clear on the nature of relationship, the communication channels, the expectations on frequency, the quality and frequency of submissions by the student, and the turnaround time. Should there be a need of having more than one supervisor, the calculation of turnaround time for the feedback to the student need to affect these two people who are going to need time to have their feedback sent to the student. And it's also important to have clear roles of the student and of the supervisor. So important to have a thorough planning and preparation for these meetings, and to be clear what are the expected standards for preparing for these meetings. And also to keep records. Both parties must keep the records, because should there be a need for dispute, as a supervisor, if only the student was keeping the record, then you would have nothing to draw your evidence from. And the memorandum of understanding, it also needs to affect the set targets, the short term and the long term, and it has to be clear when is this expected in time. So just with these coming two slides, I just want to take us to our attention to then, if a supervisor needs some resources on bridging the gaps in postgrad supervision, what can this person, where can this person get resources from? So it all starts by self-assessment and willingness to have continuous improvement in your supervision journey. And then it's important to have a formal training on postgraduate supervision. And project management skills, I always find these very handy, because when you apply them in the students' project, it always yields good results. But you also, it's very important to have a purposeful pairing of supervisors. By this, I mean you don't need a second supervisor for the sake of having that person. You have to be clear, why is this person part of the team? And it's also very important to have the skills on workload management, because academics, they deal with a lot of workload. And if that skill is not at par, the student will end up having delayed projects, and it will affect this post-grad supervision journey. But most importantly, also, it's very important to make sure that you have knowledge of internal institutional policies. And where there are gaps, you have to advocate for strengthening of these policies to be in favor of supporting post-grad supervision. And it's also important to know the institutional resources. For example, if the student has a problem in a certain area that is outside your scope, you should be able to know who to refer the student to. And most importantly, it's important to upskill the coaching and customer care skills. The reason I say this is because the student, as much as we flatten the hierarchy and wanting them to be to be kind of partners in research while we're teaching them how to do the research, but they are also customers of the institutions where we are employed. So the resources to support students also start with self-assessment and being in touch with reality that you are preparing to be a post-grad student, or you are already a post-grad. So the self-assessment needs to tackle the issues of, are you mentally ready to take the journey? What skills are you lacking? And think about the writing skills, think about the referencing skills, think about your habit of reading literature review. These are things that you can even just start doing them before you even register, or you can upskill yourself on this while you are already registered. But you also need to ask yourself, are you really having time, and have you prioritized your supervision, your postgrad journey? Because that can also add on problems as you go along with your journey with your supervisor. Once you have done this self-assessment, it's very important then to look into your university-based resources and learn from this. And then it's also very important to take from online environment and see what you can learn, what can boost your needs and your skills. And most importantly, I emphasize that it's important to keep record of all your reading. There is no point being online and spending a lot of time reading literature, and once you've done that, you have nothing to show in the end. So it's very critical that you keep a record of all of your literature reading or anything that you've been reading. So whenever you need it, then you can be able to just have it. So the next one I want to talk about is the issue of the social sources. The social resources, this can be your family and friends. These people are interested in seeing you succeeding in your research journey. And what is most important here is really to make sure that you take effort to be deliberate on asking them for help, or whenever they give you an opportunity, they want you to help them, just be deliberate by delegating them appropriately and relieving yourself time so you can go and refresh or go and work on your project. So now back to the process, how we can manage the gaps in the process. So with regard to the gaps in the process, I identified some few gaps. These are in course supervision, submission of substandard work, managing of supervisor comments, and keeping focus. So there are three issues I want to emphasize on in terms of co-supervision, managing co-supervision team. It's having clear roles, having teamwork, and communication all the way. With regard to clear roles, I believe in strength-based co-supervision approach, where you make sure that the roles of each supervisor are aligned to the supervisor's strength. By so doing, then you make sure that you don't have to be asking people to pour from empty cups. And at the same time, you also need to include this in the memorandum of understanding, what exactly is each person's. And I advise that it's important to move as a team and keep a united front as co-supervisors to the student and focus on the goal of completing the supervision journey. And then where there is miscommunication, this needs to be dealt with as soon as possible. But for the students, I also want to alert you that it's important to learn your supervisor's strengths. If you have more than one supervisor, you really need to know what each of them they bring in your table and what each of them they can help you with, and then utilize their strength accordingly. So in terms of managing the substandard submission, as I have mentioned before in preparing the memorandum of understanding, it's important to set standards at that phase. Should that standard not be adhered to, it's very critical that as a supervisor, you get the student to revisit the unacceptable standards. For example, if you had agreed that you cannot be dealing with grammatical errors in a PhD candidate's draft of submission, then you've got, when that happens, you've got to revisit what you had stated is going to be consequences of that. If perhaps you've stated that the consequences of that would mean you are going to only focus on grammatical errors, and instead of the big chunk of the rest of the comments, then you've got to demonstrate what you promised so that then you can enforce compliance. And by so doing, you're also creating a culture of uplifting the standards or good quality standards of production of work by the candidate, because in the near future, that candidate will also be supervising somebody. So in terms of managing supervisors' comments, I want to start by bridging some gaps in terms of the actual feedback. The nature of postgrad supervision entails writing or talking about feedback, and the kind of feedback we give to the student can make or break the student. So it's very important here, colleagues, to make sure that you have a very structured feedback, a deliberate structure to approach your feedback. There are a lot of approaches that you can use, but the one that I like and which I also use, I pay attention to making sure there is something positive and encouraging that I've said to the student, and so as to make sure that the student is not crushed into pieces when he's getting the part that really needs to be corrected. Then it's also important that then you become very clear what needs to be corrected in this particular document. But most importantly, sometimes students, they would send a document to you as a supervisor. They've already exhausted all avenues. They really can't think any further than that. So if your feedback is busy having lots of questions, what do you mean by this? Then, and it doesn't allow the student to have an exit point, perhaps in form of suggestion or advice that I'm not sure what you're saying here, but perhaps this is what you could think about, then it actually it's not enabling to the student. So I advise feedback that is very clear of the next step to be taken by the student so that the student can. I have some tips for students here that when you attend to supervisor's comment, you really need to make sure that you don't take them personal, and they are not about you. They are not about you writing, or it's about the project itself, or even if it's about the writing, but it's not you. You are not the writing, you are yourself. So you've got to separate the two, the comments to the project and the comments to you. And you also need to then, when you approach these comments, you have to start by reading for not responding. Just read them to get the hang of what they are. If you find some discouraging comments, just take a break and then bounce back. You may need to call a friend perhaps and vent, or update your journal and say, oh, the comments that I received or whatsoever. But then you need to quickly bounce back. You don't need to dwell too much, because then you are going to waste a lot of your time. So in that case, you also need to start rereading for understanding, followed by making notes of what are you going to do going forward. Start with easy tasks and then highlight those that you may need to clarify them with your supervisor. If allowed in your agreement, you can just pick a call and ask the supervisor if this is the part you don't understand, and then you get clarity and you move on. It's very important to work on your comments immediately, because if you don't, more especially if you had a verbal meeting, it's very easy to forget what was said in the meeting if for it for a very long time. So it's also important that it's important that you work on the comments, and it's also important that you make sure that you are learning from the comments. That's one of the problems that the postgrad students, they find themselves having problems with, that they actually lose learning in the process of the supervision. They focus so much into comments, and then where perhaps, for example, some students, they will just accept all track changes without checking what exactly the supervisor was demonstrating and learning from how the supervisor did what he has done on the document. So you've got to prioritize learning from the comments and also avoid selective address of the comments. Supervisors mostly, they know exactly what they asked you or what they've said in the document. They would, or let me say, what was problematic in that revision, it will remain problematic until the problem has been addressed. So if you jump some particular comments, it's going to backfire on your progress, because your supervisor will have to comment on that again. But you also need to manage your focus as a student. Your main goal, I assume, then would be to complete on record time. If that is your main goal, so your actions have aligned, you should be writing. You should be writing all the time, and be intentional about your writing time. If you're quite a random writer, just get writing. And because your supervisor would never move on to comment if you don't get any submission to his or her desk. And you need to be disciplined. You can't be all over the show and attending all social events while you have a PhD to complete, or you have a master's degree to complete. And you also have to balance between submitting on time and submitting quality work. And it's also important, should you have not, if you have a not so good relationship with your supervisor, which is not desirable, but if you are in that case, you really need to choose your battles and focus your eyes on completing your work as you desire, and preserve your energy for your work. You also always need to believe in yourself and trust your supervisor as your leader. Some tips for supervisors to remain focused. The goal could be that the supervisor wants to graduate students, but it's very important for this to set realistic targets, and always know that students set themselves for priorities, and they set themselves for moving to the next level. It's things that you cannot do them for the student. So you also need to place your efforts where they will yield the results. For example, if you have you have to be able to know, how do you decide on prioritizing student? If you have a student that has a submission that is due perhaps to the examiner's office, or you have a student who has a submission that is just due between you and your other colleague supervisor. It's also important to dedicate time to the student who need the more than usual coaching, even though you prioritize, you have the other priorities set. So I would like us to also look at managing the progress. So with the managing of progress, I look at the 3 enemies of progression. And with this, I'm going to take you through to some difficult supervisors, difficult students, and lack of accountability, and look at how we can deal with this. So with regard to difficult supervisors, I just chose 3 amongst the many that may be there. One can be a micromanaging supervisor. and this person, as much as it's a matter of preference, independent students may hate having an over-controlling supervisor. So if you are that particular student, it's important that you demonstrate that you can be independent. Perhaps it can make the person to be less demanding on being over-controlling. And also it's important to just verbalize your underlying concerns. But also it's important for us today to talk about the absent supervisor. These supervisors, unfortunately, they exist and they hold very high profile positions, and they are over accomplished, and they may be too busy to be seen by a student. Unfortunately, if you have to deal with this, if you are an independent student, it's really assuring that the person is not so close to you or is not available. But it's very stressful to a student who really needs guidance. So if you're dealing with this as a student, it's important to revisit the agreement that you've had with your memorandum of understanding and talk about the need for regular meetings. And if that doesn't work, you really need to consider moving to the different supervisor. Why I'm saying this is because I would really want to emphasize the importance of keeping your focus, that you want to get to the end and you don't want to waste too much time dealing with things perhaps that are beyond your control. Then it's also important for us to talk about the overly critical supervisors whom they come across as making you feeling like there is nothing good that you ever submit. And in this case, these people, they would make you to be very depressed and have self-esteem destroyed, or self-confidence in your journey very destroyed. So you really need to take this kind of supervisor during your meetings. You have to take some assertiveness to say you would like to suggest how your comments should be presented to you, and suggest a balanced comments that I've spoken about, where at least there are some highlights of the good things that you are doing, so that at least you can have the balanced feedback and have your self-esteem in check. But we also experience some difficult students, and these are characterized by an absent student. And this absent student may be absent for months and months and months, until you have a complete disconnect. You may even forget what the initial submitted draft was about. So in this case, colleagues, it's very important that you check. I actually usually just take an approach firstly to check if the person is still alive, because then you cannot, it also appears inhumane to be so concerned about the production of the document or of the submission without knowing if the person's health is fine or everything is fine. But then once you can establish the person was fine somewhere, then you've got to start having a conversation on the evidence that evidence of the work that has been done. Perhaps the person has been working, it just has not been submitted. So you've got to review the expectations in that case and adjust. And then you can find a case of a student that is not hibernating completely, but he just delays submitting. And this kind of a student, you also need to pinpoint the behavior of the student and keep record of facts and highlight what your experience is and the effect of these experiences, and then allow the students to
depender demais. Você pode pedir dinheiro na tua mãe para ir comprar pão, pode pedir dinheiro na tua mãe para ir.
And colleagues, I also want to talk about what I call a self-sabotaging student. This kind of a student works very hard, yet is working against the correct direction. So the reasons for that, the student would not be paying attention to details or to the advice that the supervisor is giving. And the effect to that, the student will be submitting on time, but submitting poor quality work. So this kind of a student, it's important, if you are dealing with this student, to assist the student to work, to get the work done as soon as possible. Whenever you start, the student must have an allowance to call you immediately while he is not gone too far. So in terms of managing the progress, colleagues, is very important for us to create accounting structures, or else the student would end up not finishing on time. And the accounting structures the supervisor can create, you can have structured progress meetings that they are structured such that the student report on the progress. And both of you can keep the minutes of these meetings, but also what also works, what I've found useful, is bringing your group of students to be part of your current research reporting meetings. If perhaps you have a research program that is ongoing, then it makes the student not to be only reporting to you, but also to see themselves reporting to the other academics and seeing that it's important to, it kind of make the person not to feel a pressure to work hard, because if he knows he's going to report in that particular meeting, then he's more likely to put some work towards reporting good progress. But if these all fail, it's really important to have a scheduled catch-up time, which is like focused just on reporting progress, even if that meeting has nothing to do with giving each other comments, but is focused on just reporting progress. And then as a student, it's important to create your own planning and have realistic timelines. And I really advise timelines have to be always revised and discussed with your supervisor, because students have a tendency to, which is good, they also focus on the graduation day. But sometimes the focus on graduation day is not so aligned with the actual tasks that are required, the baby steps that are required before the submission of the actual document to be examined and then followed by graduation. So it's very important to be in touch with the reality of this. Should the student see some delays, perhaps he was supposed to have some work submitted, it's very important to communicate these delays. This is also showing some professionalism in the relationship that the student and the supervisor is having. So colleagues, now I'm going to talk to you about how you manage yourself and as a student and as a supervisor throughout this supervision journey. And I'm focusing my talk into really mental health issues in postgrad studies and what you could do to keep sane. So, of course, postgrad studies, they really can be so daunting to the student. And because the reason for this is because postgrad studies, they are studies that we undertake as already adult learners with families and other responsibilities. So it may not just be the studies that are too heavy, it may be other things to pay attention to. So my take for this is really that it's very important to take a habit on reflecting on your positive achievements. Because even if there is one thing that doesn't go well in life, there are things that could be going well. So, and also take a habit of rewarding yourself of little achievements. I usually ask my student after each and every milestone, a simple milestone as defending a PhD proposal, then I would say to the student, take yourself for table for one and sit in that restaurant, order a small thing as coffee and relax and reflect on what you've done. And it can be anything that the person is in a person's capacity to do. But it's also important to diarize recharge activities. Here, I mean, when you are too involved in your postgrad journey as a student, you may end up feeling guilty for taking time to go and do something that is beneficial to your own refreshment. Then one of the good ways of dealing with this is to schedule it so that that time is in your diary, it's known, it's for you to go and visit a family or to do whatever that refreshes you. And by so doing, it actually allows you not to feel guilty for having done that. But it's also important to find a space to talk, safe space to talk and seek help for your other problems, and also to focus on completion, because if then, because of the other problems, you end up losing focus on completing your degree, then that failure to complete will also add and be a demotivator and lead to depression. It's also important to surround yourself with like-minded colleagues. And in terms of supervisors' mental health, supervisors can get absorbed by the student behaviors, but I would like to say you never have to be reactive to this, and you also need to really reflect on your own lived experiences. If you had your negative lived experiences, you really need to let go of and redefine the supervision experience. Brand your own supervision that you want to be experienced by students who come to consult in your office. And it's very important that when you brand your own supervision, you focus both on the experiences for completion and the experiences on relationship, on how you relate with the students. And it's important then to find distressing activities also after dealing with difficult students, as the reality. So once these gaps I've discussed are bridged, likelihood is that you'd have the skilled supervisors and dedicated students and the quality relationships, which then you'll also, when it's combined with hard work and timers, constructive feedback and strong quality assurance from the main supervisor, this would lead to good experiences such as graduating on time, or future collaborating with your student, or good experiences of mentoring that can take us back to what I defined as going beyond just completing a thesis. So colleagues, in conclusion, I would like to say that it is a journey of two different individuals, and each has a role to play. And it's important to focus on the goal and be able to foresee and close the gaps on time. And these gaps can, as we have seen, they can be at foundation, process, progress, and focus. And also it can just be that there is a need for one to avoid failure, to learn and unlearn in the process. So having said that, colleagues, I would like to invite you for questions. I've tried to go fast so we could have just time to have some questions despite the earlier glitches. But before that, I would like to thank my host, Dr. Desmond and Dr. Abioye from Lebin Gate. And I would like to thank my colleagues, Dr. Pascalia Calvin and the soon-to-be Dr. Busisiwe Matiwane, whom they have critically reviewed my presentation for today. Thank you so much. And I've attached my contacts should anybody be interested in taking this conversation forward. I know it's just a quick talk, and of course we can talk more about this in future engagements. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think you deserve a hand of applause. Can we just give it to her? Can we just give it to her? This is well done. This is well done. Let me see your emojis clapping for her. I want to see them. It will also be good to show your faces. I think this time let's show our faces if you can. If you are not in a dodgy place, you can show your faces. I mean, thank you so much. Thank you so much. People, show your faces. Come on. You are not a robot. I hope I'm not talking to robots here. Show your faces, please. And just keep that hand. Just keep clapping. I told you. At least we bring in the best to you. If you have all this information and you fail as a student or a supervisor, then you have indeed failed. Then that is your problem. Because this is what I call common sense, not commonly practiced. And I mean, she's absentee supervisor. Can you imagine? They pay him, he's busy doing hide and seek, overbearing supervisor. He's busy there trying to put us in his own image there. No, Doc, thank you so much. You want to clone us. I refuse. And I like what my colleague has said there. I know the blend of mental health and research. So I see my senior colleague saying that at the end, research is about applying the mind to the science. So imagine if the mind is confused, we would apply it to something else. You see? So guys, I think this is time for questions. You want to add your things. I know there are some seasoned people in the group. You want to say something. I know, very articulated. I told you, we bring the best. We are not here for mediocre people. We don't associate ourselves with people who don't know where they are going. And that is why, as a student or a lecturer in this platform, this is an opportunity for you to make good use of all these resources. I mean, you can have all this intellectual engagement, but if you decide not to apply them, you will be the same person. It is Mark Twain who said, the man who does not read good books has no advantage over the one who cannot read them. And so let me rework it into what I'm trying to say. The man or woman who does not apply lessons learned from reading or attending workshops or webinars has no advantage over the one who didn't attend it, nor listen to it, or listen to it and did nothing about it. So thank you so much. Dr. Abie, I see you are laughing there. I see you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Tenza. That's is a lot. That's a lot. It's a lot. Thank you so much. I have a question here, and it's sent from one of my students, and another one from a supervisor. You talked about supervisors' mental health. The supervisor's mental health. What is the maximum number of students that a supervisor can supervise at the same time? How many students, how many students do you suggest that a supervisor can supervise at the same time?
Can you hear me?
Yes, of course.
Okay, colleagues, this is really a mouthful question, but okay. So this is what I want to say first. What is most, I spoke about workload management skills amongst academics, because then supervision, it's a component of other tasks. And the supervisor skills, they come into play, and also the quality of the students that you are attracting, it also comes into play. So for me to say it, I cannot have a one-size-fits-all answer to say this is the number of the students that a supervisor must supervise. But for me, I would like to encourage assertiveness amongst us academics and the students. For this case of this question, you don't want to overload yourself with students when you have no capacity to deliver, because you don't want to be an enemy of progression and contribute to less progress to the students. And just have a tick, because there are people who just want to have a tick list of how many students they are supervising. Mm-hmm. Yes, yet all of them, they are just in the pipeline. There is nobody who gets to the other end. So it's very important then that as a supervisor, you make sure, I usually pace my student at different levels of supervision journey. If I have students that are closer to the exit, I have a group that is in the middle, I have a group in the beginning. Then by so doing, it becomes less demanding. Because if you have students that are at proposal development phase, their demand is not the same as a person who is compiling a thesis that is having a target to submit a thesis. So you really need to plan around the tasks and the capacity of the students, because some students, due to their background before they get to their postgrad studies, they really have not had a good ground to plant in. So if you don't, if then you pay attention to you don't have, in this current year, you don't have strong students, then you cannot have a lot of students when you know you have students that are quite demanding for you to get to move with them. That's my take for that.
Can I add a bit to that?
Yes.
Okay, as somebody who has also done, so first I was also say, first of all, it's also good to take a course in postgraduate supervision. Knowing very well that I want to supervise postgraduate alone or a lot of postgraduate, I actually took a course in postgraduate supervision. Now there are about 4 classes of supervisors. We have the loner supervisor, that want to do it alone. He's an individualist person. So based on that person, you would have to decide if you want to have certain number of people, and you should also have a target for yourself and say, this is what you want to do. And that is driven by availability of fund, the availability of students. Then we have what we call a group or panel supervision. Now, the group or panel supervision is what is done when you have 2 or 3 or 4. It's also called expert supervision, where like the good doctor made mention of the fact that if you are the main supervisor, you're not good in the area, make sure you have a co-supervisor. What that happens is that you have too many minds that goes around to help you. Then we also have what we call the peer-to-peer mentoring or supervision, where the process is that when a student who is a PhD student at the final year is doing, and then you have one doing proposal, that student gets to look at the proposal and try to make certain recommendations. And also with the peer-to-peer supervision, what happens is that, for instance, in our research team, we are starting something where every 2 weeks, we're going to make our student present, and they present different phases. And then we're going to have people in there so that these expert reviewers can indirectly help smoothing the process. And also the supervision is driven by the outcome. So for instance, if you are a supervisor and you're interested in making sure your student publish, then you want to do it by, when they want to do their thesis by publication, what happens is that anything they do, because you have expert reviewers, so their document gets reviewed at different stages. And that also helps you. And that also slows the pressure on you as a supervisor and your mental health. So what I normally recommend and say is that, look, 1, you should not bite more than you can chew. Number 2, don't be too greedy. I would rather have 4 solid PhD students in 4 years than have 10 PhD mushroom students who finishes and you ask, are you sure you got a PhD? And if you are somebody and somebody says, are you sure you went to a university? That basically is an indictment on the part of the supervisor, because a supervisor is a mentor. You may not really be well vested in the area, but because you have traveled that journey before, you provide a guide. So I say a supervisor should be an ally. You should be able to inspire students. You should be able to guide them. You should be able to bring your experience to bear. So it's just not about flashing people through. It's about making sure, I'm very obsessed with excellence. And anything that looks like mediocrity, I don't want to go near it, because then it puts your name in jeopardy. And anytime you write a paper, that student writes a paper, the supervisor name is attached like this, and you can't take it out. So this should inform the number. So I think the number issue, like the good doctor already said, it will be driven by what you want to do and how you want to do it, and then what you want to get out. I think when I made my talk, I talked about the deliverable is not the thesis. The deliverable is the person. So, and that is why supervisor, I like what she said, you can make or break. So if somebody comes in, I had series of supervisors at different stages. You write something, then the supervisor writes that this is BS. You write something, then the supervisor said even a 3rd-year student can do this. You write something, then he says, no, I don't believe in this. I will also want to write it my own way. So I have, you see, Doc, I have all the classes of supervisors you've mentioned. I've gone through all of them. The overbearing one, the absentee, those that are very absent. You submit a document to them, a paper to them. The deadline is 2 days. They only submit it a month later. After the deadline has passed, when you ask, oh, I submitted it. Oh, okay, I forgot about it. Things like that. But at the end of the day, make sure you cut your coat according to your size. If you can do 3, do 3. Some of the things I recommend, to upcoming researchers is please don't work alone. If you are a supervisor that you are too busy, why don't you get a good funding, recruit 3 or 4 postdocs, and use those postdocs to do all the dirty works, and then you just look at the final one and approve it, and then it lessens your work. The thing with most African academics is that we are too greedy, and I'm saying this with no iota of doubt, no apology. We are too greedy. He can be a vice chancellor. He also wants to be the head of school. He also wants to supervise 30 people. And then what you chunk out there is not what we are seeing. That is why we end up putting a lot of square pegs in round holes. So I think this is the little I want to add to it. Thanks.
Thank you, Desmond. There is a question.
Go for it. I think there is a question there. Somebody says, I'm coming. How to manage conflict between supervisor and students? Any ideas?
How to manage a conflict
between a supervisor and student? Any ideas? Maybe from your practical experience, have you had any of these things? It could be hypothetical.
Yes, that is a very important question. And you know, prevention is better than cure. Like, for example, my presentation came from the angle of identifying gaps and already talking about gaps that can exist in the whole journey of supervision. So to deal with the conflicts, some conflicts could have been prevented if you identify the person earlier enough that you are just not going to jail with this person. Because one critical issue I wanted to emphasize in my presentation is that there is a relationship component of supervision, then there is the action component where you actually do the work. But relationship, it also counts a lot. There are, if really you see the person from the beginning that you're just not going to gel up with, then prevention is better than cure. Then you've solved the conflict before it happens. Then you just don't pair yourself with a person that you think that you're just not going to work well. But in cases where you have had some good work and then now you have a conflict, it also depends what the conflict is about. Because like I've said, you have to pick your battles. When you are a student, you want to complete your degree. If the conflict, it has, when you weigh your goal of getting to the end and your energy to the conflict, and you see there is a way around this particular conflict without dealing with it, you can ignore it and move. But if you realize this conflict is a major issue, it really needs you to sit and address it. Assertiveness is a skill. There is nothing wrong with explaining how you feel. The most important thing is how you come across and how you bring the conversation forward without without interfering with how you relate with a person. So managing conflicts is just the same as how we manage conflicts in our relationships in general, because this is a relationship, the supervisor-student relationship.
Thanks a lot.
I just want to add that it's very important when you have the conflicting conversation to keep record of this conflicting conversation. So then you have evidence of what was discussed when it was discussed and what was the way forward. But I really urge students, most importantly, I urge us supervisors to create an environment conducive for learning and know that students, they are your future collaborators and they are already kind of like your colleagues in the research space. But it's also very important for the student to have so much energy invested in your project than in conflicts, if possible.
Thanks a lot. One of my supervisors said to me that I'm going to rattle your feathers. If you don't want it, the only way you don't want to rattle people's feathers is to go and sell ice cream. So just bear that at the back of your mind. That's just by the way. They say, when is it advisable for a student? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
When
Yes.
is it advisable for a student to change a supervisor? Hey, this is a hard one. I'm glad I'm not the one answering it.
No, thank you very much, colleagues, for that question. It's very important. Okay, for me, I really put so much value in progress. I would not stand anything in my supervision journey, even if I put myself in the shoes of the student, I would not stand anything that affects my progress, my getting to the end, because I'm a focused person. I like to see progress. So it's very important, most importantly, keep record of your engagements. By the time you want to put a case of changing a supervisor, you must have had a good evidence of all the reasons that supports all the reasons you want to choose the supervisor. And then the question says, when is it advisable? When you see no progress in your work, it's an indicator something needs to be changed. Because if you do the same thing all the time and expect different results, then you are not on. So you
are
really
insane. Ma'am, just say it. You are insane.
You really have to see, you have to see what you need to change. And if in this case, the piece of the puzzle that needs to be changed is the supervisor, you cannot deal with that without evidence. You have to have evidence that you've collected, that this is your experience. And then while you're collecting evidence, you also need to take some effort to sit with this person and say, I have this kind of concern, not a concern of changing supervisor, but these things you are going to say when you request change of supervisor, there've been a problem. You must show that you have attempted to solve them and they are not being corrected. And then that's a strong motivation that you are not progressing and you need to change the supervisor.
Yeah, thanks. And guys, this is a conversation. So please bring your A games here. I mean, it's very, very important. I also want to say something that at least we need to take a step back. They say, when is it advisable to change a student, for a student to change a supervisor? One, before you enter it, this is why, for me, my students, no matter who you are, you can be the president of the world. We were going to sign that document as a supervisor-student relationship. And when we sign that document that says a contract is binding, in that contract, we decide how often we are going to meet. And me, I tell my student, and anyone that send me an email, if you don't receive an email response from me in the next 1 day after you send the email, then there's something terribly wrong. So it is the duty of one, the student, and then the supervisor to ensure that that contract you have in your hand is binding. The way I see a student-supervisor relationship, or a student, at any phase of your life, you are an employee. Your employer is the university. You are getting paid, and the salary you get at the end, your cumulative salary, is that certificate. So if anybody is going to stand in your way, you as a person needs to ensure that you are sure of what you are doing, to ensure that you don't become a pawn in someone's chessboard. So one, make sure as a supervisor, design your own document, even if the universities don't have it. Most universities in South Africa have it. People don't go according to it, but design this and let the students sign it, and just don't let the students sign it. I have a session where we'll sit and discuss the terms. I call it terms of reference. So for instance, in 6 months, when I start with you in 6 months, I'm expecting that we are submitting a review paper. So if you come and you are telling me stories, oh, that is grounds for me to disown you before you try disowning me. So the thing is that let us ensure we do this, because these are destinies of people. And having been a postgraduate and now having been in the other side, we students sometimes can be very lazy and blame it on the supervisor. And supervisors too can be very lazy and blame it on the student. So if there is no document to show that we agreed that in 3 months you are submitting something to me, and make sure when you have a verbal agreement, I learned this in from my supervisor. When you have a verbal agreement, immediately I stepped out of my supervisor's office and email will follow. Dear Prof, based on the discussion we have, these are the 3 things we've agreed on with date and timeline. I am expecting that we'll be able to do this. So for me, I will cover my back as a student. I used to do it as a student. So now that I'm a supervisor, even I've become more critical. Because the slightest thing you do, somebody will throw a dent in your reputation. And we as academic, we thrive on our integrity, our character, and our reputation. So it is very important that you do this. I'm just saying this. I don't like to treat symptoms. I like to treat root causes of a problem. So I would rather nip the thing in the bud before it comes to bite me, because we may take these things for granted. I'm examining about 4 or 5 different theses and dissertation. And I see that a comment was made by the supervisor, the student ignored. And I've picked up the same comment again. And then when I tried to check around, they said the professor has said, this work is not ready. And then the student says, I want to submit it. So you see that type of conflict. How do you solve it? I know you need to come to a point where you bring the student and say, this is the thing. If you want to submit it, I'm willing for you to submit, but I'm going to write a strong email and say to the head of school, it is not ready, but the student say you want to submit it. So sometimes I always want to bring my student along and say, look, this is the situation. Sometimes supervisors tend to assume the student should know better. And sometimes the student tend to assume the supervisor should know better. But for all of us to come to a point where we all know better or we don't know better, we would have to have an agreement. So for me, I say is that agreement is the way. As an upcoming researcher or as a student, make sure you have things written down or send an email. I call it documentary evidence. I told you before, when my PhD went to court, it is because I kept good record of document of email that was sent. That is what saved me. Because when I receive an email, and anytime I send email to people, I insist they respond. Don't respond to me on the phone. Because human beings, you can lie about it. I will say, or even when you respond to me on the phone, I will write back to you. And I will say that you said this on the phone, da, 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 da. And if you rebut it on the phone, on the email, then it's better. If you don't rebut it, then it becomes evident. Because please, we are dealing with human beings. And when it comes to a place, and we live in a part of the continent, Africa, it is not in Europe, where a supervisor can easily be sacrificed for the student, because the student are perceived as the customer. In Africa, where we come from, when a supervisor cough, especially the part of the Africa I grew up, when a supervisor cough, you can get migraine, and that migraine can mean you are failing. So you would have to protect yourself. That's just by the way. Another question. How do you manage disagreement between 2 supervisors with respect to aspect of your work? I am glad I'm not the one carrying this.
Okay. Good. So thank you so much for that question. So the supervisors have disagreements.
So you have a principal, a main supervisor, and you have a co-supervisor. Yes. But they disagree on an aspect of the work, and the student is now in the middle. How do you sort this thing out? It's a very confusing thing.
Okay. So in that manner, it's something I didn't touch on in co-supervision management. So what usually helps before it gets to the student, when you manage co-supervision, it's very important that they are between the supervisors in areas that are very critical. Then you kind of agree on the feedback before you send it to the student. That also helps to deal with the disagreements that will end up not showing a united front and in the presence of the student. That is one way of dealing with it. But if you are at that phase where now you are a student and you have two supervisors that are disagreeing, I think what is important then is just to have a meeting that brings three of you together, and then you can all talk about and reason, because there wouldn't just be a disagreement without a reason. And there is that disagreement wouldn't be new in the field that only those two people have those two different versions of how things are. So should these two supervisors then, they are disagreeing about this particular, something that is this particular methodology or this particular aspect of the student, maybe about the interpretation of the results, then there is, within that discussion, reasons why each of them think that way would come out, and hopefully then you won't be in the middle as a student. They would have to sort themselves up in the presence of in your presence. But I think from our African culture as students, our African culture, one of the major problems that has an effect in our relationships, in our supervision journey, is the issue of being discouraged to speak, more especially to people that you see them as adults or above you, or that there is this hierarchical dilemma. And then hence I've been always talking about assertiveness, because then when you get to a point where you are able to speak out without thinking you are offending somebody when you speak, but you are just speaking the fact politely, then it's easy for you to even ask both supervisors there for them to create, to come up with a solution in that particular meeting. Because you need an exit, and you need to go to the next, you need to move to the next phase. And it can't be a problem to have their disagreement.
No, thank you so much. And it's also for co-supervision, I think you can only work well when the two people agree. But if it's on an aspect of the research work, I think the more important thing is to look at it, whether it's not managing other people's ego or it's actually the thing that needs to work. And like you said, you need to come to the table where there is a meeting. The next question says, how do you manage supervisors with poor communication skills?
Okay, thank you so much for that question. Those supervisors, I'm sending them already to that customer care skills that I've spoken about, because then I mean, as the people who are usually supervisors, we are highly educated, we hold PhDs, and we are really at that level. Customer care skills I'm talking about, they are usually skills trained at a very low levels, but it's okay for us to go to learn those skills if it will save a conducive environment for our working with students and working with colleagues, and create an environment conducive for learning, because research space is all for postgrad students, it's all about learning. Hence I was mentioning that should, even with supervisor comments, if you find something that it gets personal, you have to have a skill to not to pay too much attention to that, and no, it's not a reflection on you, it is a reflection of the person who is speaking. But there is also one important aspect that I would want to talk about in response to the poor communication skills, that what you don't put too much value on doesn't hurt you. So if you really reduce the value on what was spoken to you when the person has said what he has said, and keep your focus on your research project, and then at the end, you may not have had a best experience in terms of relationship, but you don't also want to lose the goal of attaining your degree.
Thank you so much. Can I use these opportunities to do some few announcements? If you have any questions, you can still drop them. After the announcement, I will take them. The first one is that the forthcoming International Conference on Sustainable Engineering and Materials Development, which is organized by LabingGate. We're holding it in September 2022. And we are entreating all of us to make sure you send your papers there. The papers will be published in a peer-reviewed journal indexed in Scopus. And then also participants should tell or encourage their institutions and universities to sign up their laboratories on LabingGate. If you notice that LabingGate, what we are doing is that we are creating a virtual platform where people can share resources. So look at LabingGate as if it is a carpool type of things where we bring laboratories together. So people that are in the part of Africa or the part of developing countries where they don't have access to some of the state-of-the-art equipment can be able to leverage from those that have it. So for instance, if you're in East Africa and you don't have resources, it's much easier if I know that if I come to Dr. Tenza's lab, I'll be able to get access to some of the tools she used, then it's much easier for us to use. And we do this, we in LabingGate only provide a platform where you can be able to do that. And also institutions that sign up through the LabingGate platform, you will be making money. And then technically you'll not be giving us anything. But when we create this, it also helps us to be able to link researchers and experts with different type of people so that I think we can contribute in terms of collaborating and networking. So I entreat you to come and do this. And also please send your papers. Your papers will be published and also your papers will give you an opportunity to present your work. I know somebody just has a question around poor communication skills. The only way as a researcher you can get your work out there is to be able to communicate them. So you either communicate by going for a conference or you communicate by publishing them. So your inability to communicate it can be to your own detriment. So we entreat all of you to participate in this. And please make sure that you send all these things to people you know, to your research team, to your groups, so that at least we can make this thing a formidable thing that everybody can participate in. And also, we also want to say students that are looking for postgraduate diploma opportunities in Canada, you should be able to book an appointment on the labingate.com/consult website. Book your appointment. We have expert people there that will help you. That will make sure that you can also get this so that at least you are well informed. Like I always tell people, information, quality access to information is what will help to lead to the transformation that we are looking for as far as the African continent is concerned, and also for your well-being as a researcher. And I believe that today you have learned something or you've picked one or two things from this particular webinar and this engagement that you as a student, you are going to use to fine-tune and shape your life. And you as a supervisor, you're going to use to do things differently. Like the presenter said, if you continue doing the same thing and expecting different results, you know what the answer is. So we just also want to thank you so much for coming through. Do we still have any questions? Now, please, may I also say that in the chat box, we've put the link there for you to be able to give us your feedback. We want to know what you're thinking. We want you to tell us how this webinar, our webinars are going, what we can do differently to make sure that we give you the best. And also, please, if you are on this platform and you can be able to present your data, you want to present something very specific, this is an opportunity. Reach out to us. You can send me an email. You can send an email to the LabingGate. Please, Dr. B, can you just put the email address in there? Send us an email. We'll schedule a platform so that we can engage together, so that collectively we can move this whole idea of developing using data-driven research approaches to doing things. So thank you so much. And that is the email. It's admin@labingate.com. Send us your email. We want to know what you're thinking. We want to get your feedback. This will help us fine-tune, tailor our webinars to suit your very needs. So on this note, we also once again want to thank you all. And I think that I have made all the announcements. And I also want to say this, the LabingGate also have a particular platform. If you're a participant on this call or on this webinar, and you're having difficulty in situating yourself in research or publication of some grant application, Please, we have people in-house that that can help you be able to craft a nice story, to be able to access various grant opportunities. So please, we do this, and it's very, very minimal cost. And you can also go to labingate.com/consult and book an appointment, and somebody will be there to attend to you. On this note, I don't see any more questions. So I would want to invite my brother, Dr. Abioye, to give us a closing remarks so that we can bring a curtain to this. But before I invite him, I also want to take this opportunity to thank you all for attending this webinar. We are so excited and we're glad to have you. And also our wonderful and prolific presenter. You are spot on, you are on point, and we took some pointers and indicators that we will use to fine-tune our activities as students and as researchers. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for coming. Dr. Abioye, I'm not doing your job. I'll now hand over to you to do your closing remarks. Thanks a lot.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Desmond. Thank you everybody for joining us today. On behalf of Labingate and Webinar Planning Committee, I say a big thank you to our speaker, the erudite and prolific Dr. Tenza, for the highly educative presentation. She has demystified the heart of supervision, and I believe that all of us will gain one or two things, and we know what to do and what not to do when it comes to issue of supervision. I am sure that we all greatly learned from this session. I would like to say a big thank you to the moderator himself for today's webinar, Dr. Desmond. Thank you very much for being part of our webinar today. To every participant, we say thank you for taking your time out of your busy schedule to attend the webinar. Your presence made it a great success. We would love to hear from you, the feedback, and it's already posted on the chat box. Please fill out the survey from the link in the chat box. It only takes 1 to 2 minutes. I would also like to remind us of our upcoming international conference on sustainable engineering and materials development 2022. It's coming up in September 20 to 22nd of September. Watch out for more details, and you can also find details on www.labingate.com/conference, which is our website. Also, Labingate has partnered with some colleges in Canada and for recruitment of international students in Africa seeking admission. If you are interested, fill our consultancy form on our website or send an email to admin@labingate.com. Please note that the webinar admission for 2023 is open. The winter admission for 2023 is open. So if you're interested in anything postgraduate diploma, please, this is the right time for you to send us your email. Please encourage your institutions to sign up their laboratories on Labingate platform to give the laboratories visibility and bring the equipment close to the researchers in any part of the country. Please contact us for any other research services that you need. And on this note, I will still like to say once again, thank you very much for joining us. It's our great pleasure to have you all in this webinar. On this note, we will be ending this meeting. Thank you very much, Dr. Tenza. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Desmond.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much. See you
so much, Dr.
Abioye. The next date for the webinar will be communicated to you in due course. So watch out.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Are you a researcher? Are you currently struggling to identify the right equipment for your research? Are you having challenges locating the equipment? Then Labingate Incorporated has the solutions to your problems. Labingate is an online platform with a capacity of more than 10 million equipments, 100,000 laboratories, and 5 million researchers in 5 continents across the globe. Visit www.labingate.com to be one of the million researchers on the platform. You can also create an account with us at Laboratories to make your services and equipment more visible to researchers.
Hello, dear research colleagues. What are the challenges you are facing? Are you a researcher? Are you in need of the nearest laboratory with state-of-art equipment to execute your project? Are you currently planning to contact a laboratory or research host for your research visit or bench work? Are you a laboratory? Are you looking for increased research patronage and visibility of your laboratory? Are you interested in establishing robust research collaboration both locally and internationally? Generate revenues on laboratory equipment and sustainability of equipment maintenance? Are you an equipment manufacturer or buyer? LabingGate Incorporated, Canada, is here with an unparalleled solution by introducing LabingGate Digitalized Laboratory Innovation, LDLI, a one-stop platform to meet all your research needs. LDLI is a user-friendly platform with a capacity of over 10 million equipment, more than 100,000 laboratories, more than 5 million researchers, offering effective networking across the globe. Execute your related research transactions with ease today by signing up on www.labingate.com/register. We look forward to having you on our platform. LabingGate, the gateway to world's laboratories.